The sunlight glinted off the marble floor of the grand hall as I stepped through the double doors, hoping, somehow, that today might be different. My sister's wedding was in full swing. Laughter and music swirled around me, blending into the chatter of elegantly dressed guests. I smoothed the fabric of my dress and tried to summon a smile, imagining that perhaps my family might notice me, not as the perpetual shadow, the forgotten daughter, but as someone worthy of recognition. I hadn't expected much. My life had been ordinary, predictable, unremarkable by their standards. My achievements were quietly accumulated in the shadows, degrees, accolades, a steady career, but in this family only appearances mattered. Still, I had harbored a small, foolish hope that love and respect might transcend wealth and status. That hope shattered the moment my father's voice cut through the music. She couldn't even find a date. The words were sharp, deliberate, a blade meant to humiliate. I froze, my pulse hammering in my ears, as the hall erupted into laughter. Guests who barely knew me or pretended not to turned their eyes, smirks plastered across their faces, a chorus of mockery rising in perfect harmony. I tried to laugh it off, to brush it aside, but the sting of betrayal burned hotter than I could have imagined. My father stepped closer, his expression twisted with cruelty. Before I could react, he shoved me. My body stumbled forward, and with a splash that seemed to echo in slow motion, I landed in the fountain at the center of the hall. Cold water enveloped me instantly, soaking through every layer of fabric, clinging to my skin. The laughter didn't stop, it grew louder, sharper, as if the world had conspired to watch my fall. Guests clapped, as though I had performed some tragic circus act for their amusement. My hair plastered to my face, water dripping into my eyes. I blinked through the humiliation and let the tears mix with the fountain water. But in that moment, something inside me shifted. I raised my head, feeling the cool liquid run down my cheeks, and smiled. Not the fragile, timid smile of someone trying to survive, but a quiet, knowing curve of lips that carried a promise. "Remember this moment?" I murmured under my breath, my voice almost drowned by the jeers and music. I didn't say it to them. I said it to myself, a seed of resolve planted firmly in the soil of my humiliation. As I climbed out of the fountain, water dripping from my sleeves, I caught sight of my sister, radiant and oblivious, laughing at my expense, her hand resting in the crook of her new husband's arm. The image of perfection, the world's approval wrapped neatly around her, contrasted so sharply with my soaked, shivering figure that for a moment, rage and sorrow collided violently inside me. My father's eyes met mine briefly, a sneer tugging at his lips, proud of the spectacle he had created. My mother's face was an unreadable mask, somewhere between shock and forced composure. I stood there, dripping and humiliated, and I allowed myself a single, unwavering thought: I would not stay this person forever. Their laughter, their cruelty, would not define me. In the silence of my resolve, I vowed that one day they would remember me differently, not as the daughter who arrived alone, the target of scorn, but as someone who had the power to make them pale, to command attention in ways they could never anticipate. And so, with the fountain water running down my arms and my dress clinging to me like a second skin, I smiled. The smile of someone who had seen the depth of betrayal and had already begun to chart the path to their sweet, inevitable revenge. The humiliation lingered long after the fountain incident, replaying in my mind like a cruel, endless loop. Every mocking laugh, every sneer, every clap of cruel amusement was etched into my memory. Yet beneath the sting of shame, a slow, burning determination began to take hold. They had seen only the surface of me, wet, embarrassed, alone, but they had no idea who I truly was. No one in that hall, not even my family, had the faintest inkling of the life I had built quietly, meticulously, far from their judgmental eyes. For years, I had lived in what they perceived as insignificance. I had no flashy social life, no extravagant outings, and no need to parade my achievements. But while they spent their energy critiquing and comparing, I was forging a world entirely my own. I had climbed corporate ladders, made strategic investments, and cultivated connections with people of influence who would never, ever mock me for being alone. My life, though invisible to them, was thriving in ways they could never understand. It was during these years of quiet ambition that I had met him, my husband, the man who would one day be the key to rewriting the story my family thought they controlled. He had appeared in my life without fanfare, a figure of calm confidence and understated wealth. He didn't care about appearances, about superficial judgments or public acclaim. He saw me, the real me, and valued the strength, intelligence, and resilience I had hidden beneath the skin of the failures they so gleefully mocked. Over time, our partnership had grown into something deeper, love intertwined with mutual respect, and a shared understanding that the world often rewarded those who knew how to wait. I smiled at the memory of the first time he had said, almost casually, "One day, they'll realize exactly who you are, and it won't be pretty." At the time I had laughed, thinking it was a playful exaggeration. But now, after the fountain incident, those words felt prophetic. I could see the moment, crystal clear in my mind, when the world that had scorned me would pause, startled, unable to reconcile the past with the present. In the weeks following my sister's wedding, I threw myself into my work with renewed intensity. Every late-night strategy session, every careful negotiation, every discreet financial maneuver was a brick in the foundation of the life I was constructing. I allowed myself no distractions, no petty rivalries, no temptation to act out of spite. This was not about vengeance yet, it was about preparation. I had learned that revenge wielded poorly could be as damaging to the hand that held it as to the target. I kept my family at arm's length, attending their occasional calls and events only when necessary, always presenting a calm, composed exterior. Inside, I cataloged their weaknesses, the ways they sought approval, their obsession with status and appearance. Every insult, every condescending word, was stored carefully, a map of their vulnerabilities that I would one day use with precision. And all the while my husband remained by my side, a quiet force of support and power. He never flaunted his wealth or influence, he simply existed as a reminder that my life had shifted beyond their petty judgments. Together, we built a world that my family could not touch, a life that was theirs to envy and fear in equal measure. In the quiet moments, when the night settled and the city lights flickered against the window, I allowed myself to dream, not just of success but of the moment when my family would finally see me as I truly was. I could almost feel it, the rush of satisfaction that would come when their laughter turned to disbelief, their sneers to silence. The fountain had been the opening scene, the rest of the play, carefully scripted in shadows and patience, was yet to come. And so I waited quietly, invisibly, as my life flourished beyond their notice. The world outside their judgmental gaze was mine to shape. And when the time came, they would remember that soaked, humiliated girl differently than they ever imagined, powerful, untouchable. And finally victorious. The invitation arrived unexpectedly, a simple embossed card with elegant calligraphy. It was to a gala hosted by her sisters-in-laws, a glittering, pretentious affair where every guest would be dressed to impress, and every interaction measured for social advantage. My heart beat steadily as I held it in my hands. This was the moment I had waited for, patiently, meticulously, for years. The time to step out of the shadows and into a spotlight they could never control had finally arrived. I arrived at the gala dressed in understated elegance, every detail carefully curated. Not a single trace of the wet, humiliated woman from the fountain remained. My hair was perfectly styled, my dress tailored to perfection, and a calm confidence radiated from me that no amount of scrutiny could shake. The hall shimmered with chandeliers and polished marble floors, the air buzzing with conversations that were, as always, more about status than substance. As I moved through the crowd, I caught glimpses of my family. My sister was laughing with a cluster of friends, radiant as always, completely unaware that I was no longer the timid shadow she had long dismissed. My father's eyes flickered briefly toward me, a flash of recognition and perhaps disbelief, before he returned to his pretense of composure. I let the moment pass, savoring the slow burn of anticipation. They didn't yet know what was coming. The true surprise came quietly with the subtle arrival of my husband. He entered without fanfare, but the effect was immediate. Heads turned, whispers filled the air, and suddenly the room's attention shifted. He was tall, impeccably dressed, radiating the kind of understated power and wealth that no one could ignore. His presence was magnetic, commanding respect without arrogance. And when his eyes found mine across the room, a silent understanding passed between us, a promise that our plan was in motion. The moment we approached the family, I felt the shift before I even saw their faces. My sister froze mid-laugh, her grip on her champagne glass tightening. My father's jaw went slack, the arrogance that had defined him for decades crumbling in an instant. My mother's carefully maintained mask of composure faltered, and for the first time uncertainty flickered across her features. "Everyone," I said softly, my voice carrying easily across the small distance, "I'd like you to meet someone very important in my life." I gestured to my husband. "This is my husband." The silence that followed was deafening. Conversations halted mid-sentence, the music seemed to dim, and all eyes were on him. Slowly, they processed the truth. The man beside me was not just affluent, he was influential, powerful, and undeniable. The whispers began almost immediately. "He's a billionaire," someone murmured. "I've heard of him," another added, all laced with disbelief. I allowed a small, serene smile to play on my lips. No triumph in words, no need to boast. The shock, the disbelief, the pale faces before me were reward enough. My father's face turned ashen, a mixture of rage and incredulity. My sister's laughter had vanished, replaced by a frozen expression of helplessness. The woman who had once mocked my loneliness and drenched humiliation now faced a reality she could neither ridicule nor ignore. I felt a quiet satisfaction, a gentle echo of the words I had whispered in the fountain all those years ago. Remember this moment. The irony was delicious. The humiliation they had once inflicted on me had been reversed, not with cruelty or shouting, but with calm dignity, quiet power, and the undeniable presence of a life they had never imagined. For the first time in years, I felt complete, not because I had wealth or status to flaunt, but because I had taken control of the narrative. The ladder that had once defined me had turned to silence, disbelief, and awe, and in that quiet, perfect moment, I knew they would never see me the same way again. The days following the gala felt surreal, as though the world had shifted slightly on its axis. Every glance from my family, every whispered conversation I passed in the halls, carried the weight of recognition they had long denied me. It was no longer about revenge in the petty sense. The humiliation they had inflicted could not touch me anymore. I had moved beyond it. What remained was the quiet, profound satisfaction of being seen on my own terms, powerful, respected, and untouchable. My sister avoided me, her laughter replaced by carefully measured smiles and forced politeness. She had once ruled the family's social hierarchy with ease, but now her confidence faltered in my presence. The father who had pushed me into the fountain avoided eye contact entirely, his previous arrogance replaced with a lingering, unspoken acknowledgement that the child he had mocked so mercilessly had outgrown him in every conceivable way. Even my mother, who had long maintained a neutral stance, now treated me with a cautious respect, as though approaching a force she could neither predict nor control. I watched them all from the quiet corners of gatherings, sipping champagne or holding my husband's hand, and I felt no gloating, no petty triumph. Instead, I felt a serene sense of completion. Years of planning, of quiet growth, of nurturing a life they could not touch, had culminated in this moment. They had tried to define me, to limit me to their narrow expectations, but I had rewritten the story entirely. It was not wealth or status alone that had shifted the balance, it was the reclamation of my self-worth. I no longer needed their validation, no longer sought their approval. The laughter that had once haunted me had been replaced by confidence, the kind that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you are capable of. I had built my world quietly, strategically, and now I moved through it with the calm assurance of someone who knew their power was absolute. There were moments, late at night, when I would think back to the fountain, to the cold water, the sting of public humiliation, and the cruel clapping of the guests. Those memories no longer hurt, they had become the foundation upon which I had built my resilience. Each insult, each act of mockery had been a lesson, a push toward the life I had ultimately created. I smiled at the memory, not with bitterness, but with gratitude for the clarity it had given me. My husband remained by my side throughout, not as a crutch or a shield, but as a partner in every sense of the word. His presence was a reminder that I did not need to prove myself to anyone. I had chosen my life carefully, surrounding myself with those who truly valued me. Together, we had crafted a reality where my family's opinions were no longer the measure of my worth. In time, I began to forgive, not to absolve them, but to free myself. Forgiveness did not erase the pain, but it allowed me to step fully into the life I had earned. I no longer sought revenge in whispers or schemes. The quiet victory of living my truth was far more satisfying than any fleeting satisfaction of retribution, and so I moved forward confidently, gracefully, untethered by the shadows of the past. My family would remember the girl in the fountain, yes, but they would remember her differently now, not as someone to be ridiculed, but as someone who had risen above, who had claimed her power with quiet elegance and unwavering determination. I had walked through humiliation and emerged stronger, wiser, and unshakably whole. The laughter that once defined me had been replaced by silence, awe, and respect. I had learned the sweetest revenge is not to hurt those who harmed you, but to live a life so fully, so magnificently, that their judgments become irrelevant. And in that quiet triumph, I finally understood what it truly meant to be victorious.